We all crave peace, but what happens when prayer feels dry, life doesn't match your plans, and discouragement sets in? Well, today, Father Timothy Gallagher, acclaimed speaker, spiritual director, and author of If You Want Peace in This Life, joins me to reveal the key that helped one 18th century priest who's on his way to canonization find peace amidst suffering, and how you can too. Whether you're facing uncertainty, burnout, or self-doubt, this conversation will show you how to begin again, no matter how many times you fall. All right, well, let's jump into this conversation. We're going to be speaking about your new book, If You Want Peace in This Life, which is taking selected letters from Venerable Bruno Lantieri and trying to look at those letters that he had to directees and to others who were seeking his counsel, and be able to look at this and saying, okay, these letters, although they were written years ago, they still have relevance for us today, and they still have a power and a punch for us today. And so one of the things that I actually would like to start with is something that I've appreciated about you and all the conversations we've had over the years, ones that have been recorded and ones that haven't been. One of, I would say, your defining features as a spiritual director is your gentleness, your kindness, your gentleness, and your encouragement when it comes to the spiritual life. And that's something I've always appreciated, and clients of mine who I've encouraged to reach out to you, to speak to, have also remarked a similar disposition. And then I find myself reading these letters from Venerable Lantieri, and I say, oh my goodness, like how much of this man's words, obviously he's the founder of your order, how much of his words, how much of his message, his spiritual writings influenced your demeanor and your approach and the way that you communicate to others. So I guess that's my first question. You know, when you think of that kindness, that gentleness, that encouragement, how much of that in your own disposition as a spiritual director and as a priest has been influenced by the work of Venerable Lantieri?
Yeah, great question. It's probably hard for anyone to sift out entirely all of the influences, that create his persona and the way he interacts with the world. But he's definitely one of them. I think somewhere at the root of this for me is a profound truth about Jesus in the Gospels, which I think we're all called to live. And that is, we could go through the Gospels, and without exception, when people approach him with goodwill, now they may be very wounded physically, they may be very wounded morally, like the woman in the city, who was a sinner and so forth, or Peter, who has just denied the Lord 3 times. But invariably, what you see in Jesus is a great reverence. That's the only word I can use for it.
Mm-hmm.
And a great sensitivity for the individual heart of the person before him, in such a way that Peter's tears are released, and a healing begins. And the Magdalene, her life completely changes and so forth. So as I read the gospel, that's the only way really to interact with people who are trusting enough to bring to us the places that hurt, the deep places, the places that we don't easily share. And this was profoundly true of Venerable Bruno. Now, a part of that is that didn't come naturally to him. That was a lifelong quest. And, when I wrote his biography some years ago and got very deeply into his writings, you see this thread throughout all of his life, that his mother died when he was 4. So the feminine was taken away from him too soon in growing up. And his father was a profoundly faithful Catholic. He was a doctor, and everybody knew that if you couldn't pay, he wasn't going to withhold. He was loved, he was competent, and he was a profound Christian. But you also have references to the fact that where Venerable Bruno will say in later life that my father and I read together at table. They're both studying together. I have the impression that, the more tender, warm side of things was not really given to him growing up. You couple with that the fact that he was very intelligent, very capable, a leader, quick, to see things and understand them. And out of that, I think you get this kind of roughness, he calls it, about himself that he is so concerned to overcome. And you really see the progress made. That when people came to him, that's what they experienced in him, was that great gentleness that you've highlighted so well here. And that made him, well, during the persecution that spilled over into northern Italy, where he lived in the aftermath of the French Revolution, you have a letter from the chief of police in his native city of Turin, the French chief of police, writing back to his superior in Paris and saying that Father Lantieri is one of the most sought after confessors in the city. People were coming at all hours to him. And
Hmm.
you can see why. So, is there a link? I think so. And I think in his case, I think a lot of it goes back to St. Francis de Sales, who was a real mentor for him.
Hmm.
And I'd like to hope that, like all of us who are his oblates of the Virgin Mary, that something of him is reflected in the way I do things.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Because it definitely comes out that word with great reverence comes out often in your lectures and in your books, of course. And it's something that I've deeply appreciated and try to model within my own work as a therapist. Again, recognizing that when people come to me and open up and start sharing, I always meet that with a sense of gratitude. It's like these are difficult conversations. These aren't things that you share with just anybody. And when you choose to open up that level of brokenness, that level of vulnerability, you have
Yeah.
that level of vulnerability with me. There's something sacred, I would say, that's
Yeah.
happening there. There's something profound that's at work. There is a great mystery that I want to be reverent to. I want to be reverent to this person, to this soul that's opening up to me. And when couples come to me in distress and they're sharing things, that again that they don't share with anybody else. Similarly, we just want to have that disposition. We want to be able to approach people with that sense of kindness and gentleness, particularly when they're going through habitual sin or other challenges
Yeah.
that just don't seem to uh, be broken as easily as they themselves would want them to be, or as free as they would want to be from the cycles that they find themselves in. And there's just there's a great disposition for that. Now, psychologically speaking, there's a lot of research that's out supporting the notions of self-compassion, supporting the notions that when we operate out of a place of shame, we just are harsher on ourselves. And learning how to tone that voice of criticism is actually what's going to lead us towards greater growth. It's what's going to allow us to be able to develop some grit, some perseverance, some tenacity, some capacity to keep moving, keep taking those steps. And so at least the research that I've been looking at, the books, the authors that I surround myself with, seem to preach a similar message. And I think it's important for us to talk about that right in this onset, because what I really want us to talk about today is going back into some of the themes that Venerable Bruno speaks about related to discouragement. Uh, the title of the book itself is about finding peace. If you want peace in life, I mean, like that's who doesn't want peace in life, And there's 1,000 million people out there trying to sell you different options for how you could find peace in life. But before we just get too far with that, help me, help the reader, the listeners, excuse me, understand who's Venerable Bruno. What time in history are we finding ourselves in, and why was he such a sought after confessor and director, and why was he so prolific at writing these letters to people who
Mhm.
were seeking his counsel?
Well, let me start with the last part of that question. Why was he so sought after? And I think the heart of it is what you've just put into words really well here. My phrase for that is holy ground. When people share that place in their hearts, it really is holy ground. And you, metaphorically speaking, you take off your shoes and you approach it with reverence. Like Moses with the
Mhm.
burning bush. Um, but here's my sense of the deep core of this and why people sought Venerable Bruno and what we're hoping in our respective fields to model. When someone approaches you and says, "Hi, how are you?" Well, the social propriety is that you don't really answer the question. You say,
Hmm.
"Great, things are great. How are you?"
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
This just happened 2 days ago, actually. How is it going? Great. Everything's great. Keep
And
going.
I
I'm
think
sorry.
that that's appropriate because
It is. It is.
that's the as I say, the social proprieties
Hmm.
of it. But in places where we feel really free to share what is really most deeply in our hearts and how we are, I think, and I'll say this with reverence because it's holy ground, that there is a place deep in every one of us that is afraid.
Mm.
Uh, there's one of the hymns that says, "We all have secret fears to face." And I've often thought that that line really names something. Now, the nuances are going to be different in each person's case, but if I can, let's see if we can show this. It
Hmm.
would come down to this: Lord, you want me here, and I'm here.
Hmm.
Whatever that is, the way I use my time, the way I pray, which isn't all that I really wish it would be, the way I interact with my spouse or my children or my parents, other people at work, my involvement in the church. I'm too self indulgent. I miss opportunities to reach out to other people when they need all of these kinds of things. Somewhere in all of us, deep down, is a place that feels, I'm not all that you want me to be, Lord. Now, for most of us, that doesn't stop us from living our daily life and being faithful, to prayer and the sacraments and trying to live a good life, but it weighs upon it. There's
Mm.
kind of a grayness on the margins of it. And it's that place that Venerable Bruno knows so clearly, kind of a laser like intuition and understanding of that in human hearts. And he can approach it with great reverence. And one of the striking things that you see in these letters is these people felt free to share that deep place in their hearts with him. They knew it would be reverenced. They knew it would stood. They knew they'd be accompanied. They knew that they'd be helped when they shared it with him. And that's where his message of no, there's nothing ever stopping you from beginning again. If there's a failure,
Mm.
even 1,000 times, nothing
Mm.
can ever stop you from beginning again. And as you said, with peace in your heart, not with bitterness or anguish or intense self recriminations, but with peace, knowing that the Lord to whom we bring the as Venerable Bruno says, is honored when we bring our failure, asking his forgiveness, delights to give us that forgiveness because of the goodness in him. All right. So that's to answer the last part of the question, which I think is why, you said that his message is not outdated. I would say even more strongly than that, it's more contemporary than ever
Mm.
because there is more discouragement out there today than we've ever seen before in our lifetimes. And reasons for it are not hard to seek, with the world situation, the culture, and all the rest of it. And so a teaching which knows that place of discouragement approaches it with love and reverence and understanding and brings clarity and gives hope that the next step is open before you. That is becoming increasingly needed in our world today. And that's why Venerable Bruno is more known now today than ever before in the 200 years since he died. And I think that's not by accident. It's because his
Mm.
message is so needed. All right. Now, just
You're
very
doing great. This
briefly,
is awesome.
he was born in 1759. He died in 1830. So that's a life, and he was in northern Italy. Italy at the time was not a unified nation. It was a hodgepodge of duchies and republics and little kingdoms. And the northwest corner of Italy, nestled up against France, was the Kingdom of Piedmont, which is the name of that region in Italy still today. Piedmont meaning foot of the mountains. So you're just
Mm.
at the base of the Alps there. So those years include the Enlightenment, the explosion of the French Revolution, and the wars that convulsed Europe for the next 20 years. Fierce persecution of the church, two popes taken prisoner, one of them dying in captivity, the other surviving Napoleon. Um, and then the whole Napoleonic saga and his wars and his oppression of the church, which he tried to force into his own image. And then you have the uneasy peace of the Restoration, but too many forces had been set loose at that point, and Europe would remain in ferment. And it's in and at the northwestern corner of Italy, Venerable Bruno is at the crossroads of all of this. So it's a very
Wow.
tum- tumultuous time and place in which he lives. And that's part of it too. The witness of a faithful Catholic life when it's not easy. He risked his life. He was at one point arrested by the French police for his support of the Holy Father, whom Napoleon had imprisoned, interrogated, and was sent to exile. His priestly faculties and all were stripped from him, and he was sent to an exile into a kind of a farm property that he had outside the city of Turin, where he used to bring people for retreats and so forth. And because his health was so poor, he never expected that he would survive it. In point of fact, he did. And those years became the time when he passed from being a really fine priest to really being a saint and praying on the deepest levels. And his most fruitful works follow from that. That's another quality of him. He had absolutely wretched health all his life, and he never let it stop him.
Hmm.
It's what one, the Jesuit who later became the general of the Jesuits and who knew him, Blessed Johann Ruthan, called the miracle of his life, that what he was able to accomplish in the midst of absolutely ruined health. So you can't
Wow.
get close to him without well, I'll just say, from the day I entered our community, I kind of fell in love with him. Everybody knew that seminarian Tim Gallagher was reading everything he could about him and learning the languages he needed so he could do it. And 50 years later, he has never disappointed.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. Um, the simple life. I mean, again, so often we're looking for the big things. We're looking for the next extravagant thing to happen, but all that the Lord is asking of us is just to be faithful in the little, to be faithful in the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And so I want to start there actually, because while there's many quotes that you have in the book and many letters that you're I mean quoting and sharing to us, the reader, the one towards, I guess, what three two-thirds of the way through is the one that's actually the title of the book. How do we find peace in life? And Venerable Bruno gives an answer. And so I know you can help us understand the context of where this question is coming from, but I want to give the answer here, and we can spend some time picking this apart. He says, if you want peace in life, you must first of all decide to accommodate yourself to your circumstances, and and not demand that your circumstances accommodate to you. So, in the sense that while I think we live in an age where is the technological marvel, and we've been able to accomplish so much, and we're grateful for all the advancements, things like we're doing right now. We're only having this conversation because of the internet and cameras and microphones and computers that work, and all the telecommunication marvels that we have, that we've been able to do. These engineering feats are incredible, and it's amazing. And certainly the church never stands in the way of that type of progress, for sure. But there's a part of that in our day and age where we feel that we can always make our circumstances accommodate to us now, where we feel like we are the masters of every variable that happens within our lives. And then when we fall short of that, or where variables or things, circumstances happen outside of our control, as they often do, we are devastated by them because we don't know, as Venerable Bruno is saying here, how to accommodate ourselves to what's actually happening within our life. And so finding that balance between the things that we can change, the things that we can't, how to be able to accommodate to the circumstances that we do find ourselves. Another word that we could use here would be finding a sense of acceptance, having some humility about the circumstances as they've befallen us. To do that as a first go, it seems like what Venerable Bruno is encouraging is if we do that, that now we're on the journey towards peace. That's the first step that we need to have on this path of how to be able to find peace in life.
Mhm.
Help me
Yeah,
understand
well,
that.
I think that ultimately goes back. I mean, obviously, I couldn't agree more with everything you've just said. And my reflection as you were putting that into words, that I think this ultimately goes back to the big picture of our lives. You know, what is my life? Is it something that is simply mine and that of which I am the complete creator and designer? Or is there an infinite eternal love which chose to, in a loving providence, chose to give me life at this time rather than another, and in this place rather than another, and with these people, with this family, maybe of origin, my own family, through my own marriage, with these talents, with this kind of health, with this education, um, and has ordained all of that because, as St. John Henry Newman said in that classic phrase, which is so often quoted, I have my mission. You have entrusted to me some work which you have not entrusted to another. I am necessary for your purposes. Now, if we have that vision of our life, that's where the peace begins to come. These circumstances, with their strengths and struggles, they're not pure chance. Um, they're not just unhappy fate if they're difficult for us. But there's a God who has ordained them, knowing me in a way that no one else does, and choosing them for me in a way that, St. John Paul II so often called unique and unrepeatable.
Mm-hmm.
The way that each of us
Mm-hmm.
is in God's eyes unique. There's no other you, and unrepeatable. There never will be another you. Now, to know that, that's where peace begins to come, so that we're not fighting those circumstances, but we are living them as well as we can. And that releases us from that burden of darkness and discouragement, and allows us to live with full human and spiritual energy. If this is my family, and this is my spouse, and these are my children, and this is where I work, and this is my parish, and this is the health that God has given me, to do the best I can with all of those things. So that's what he's saying to Clementina. She's a wife and mother. She's very active in the church, so she's a very good person. In fact, we know a bit about her and her involvement in arranging for retreats that the oblates would give and so forth. But we don't have, this is the only letter of spiritual direction of Venerable Bruno to her that we have. And you get the sense from it as you read it that she was someone who struggled a bit to accept the circumstance. Now, accept doesn't mean to be passive and be a doormat.
That's right.
It means to recognize the loving providence of God that has called me to live in this situation, and calls me to live it with all the creativity and love and goodness and growth that I can in that situation. When we're fighting, it makes me think of philosophies like existentialism that gets us into a whole, where life is absurd. There's no meaning. We have to create our life itself, and it's utterly, utterly sad in it, and that always accompanies that kind of thinking. Think of Sartre and people like that.
Mm-hmm.
The contrary is what Venerable Bruno is saying. No, there's a loving God who, because he loves you, has called you to live now, here, with these people, everything else that we said. Now, release energy, live it in the way that the Lord is calling you. You could link this, if you want, to the little way of Therese, which is exactly this, taken to maybe another level. And that is that you're not going to do things that are going to make the papers very often, but the love that you can put into them can be heroic.
Yes.
That's where you find peace.
Yeah. So I could say for me, like reading this has been a grace as I've been praying with it over the last few days in preparation for our interview, and then even some other things that I've been reading. I could say in my own life that there has been a season, I would say now, of discouragement. I've been in under this intense discouragement. I can share this vulnerably. But it's been, and the reasons for it is that, like, I just left a job last summer, and I stepped out on my own to produce the podcast and to do the work that I feel that the Lord has called me to do through this more public facing endeavors as well, in conjunction with continuing my counseling practice. And I prayed and discerned, and I'm like, all right, Lord, I think this is what you've called me to do. And so I'm taking these steps. I want to follow your will. I'm taking the leap of faith as you've asked me to take. In the results, I would say, well, certainly been fruitful. But maybe one could say monetarily, financially, maybe haven't come through to the degree that I would have accepted, or I would have expected by this point. And so it does ask hard questions. And of course, the Lord operates within the context of reality. And it's like, maybe I missed that discernment, maybe I didn't, maybe I just need a pivot because I have to be able to provide for my family. And as I've been praying with this intense discouragement that I've been experiencing, I've come to a place of acceptance again, accommodating, acknowledging that, okay, if this is what God has called me to do, then I have to believe in his providence, and I have to believe in his provision also. And if this isn't, then he's going to make it clear that he's got something else for me, and that it doesn't matter, just keep being faithful to him. And where I have found some peace in my heart, even with the circumstances still being what they are, I have accepted a certain degree of humility, which is that, like, all right, Lord, like, I am like everybody else, maybe somewhere along the way, I still had some vestiges of a prosperity gospel that was still lurking deep within my psyche, that I expected everything to just work out because I manifested it or something of that nature. But trying to come to that place of acceptance of the circumstances, and then be able to discern them appropriately. Say, all right, Lord, if this is what you want, then there's certain things I have to be able to provide for the family for sure. And if it's not, then I have to be able to look. And I know that the Lord understands that and knows all that also. So just this framing again of how do we accommodate to our circumstances? A theory that I've been a fan of here as of late is called acceptance commitment therapy. And my listeners are probably sick of me talking about this. But what I love about this theory is that it starts with this notion of, if we can just come to a place of acceptance about our circumstances, then we can actually look at them with again, humility. And then from there we say, well, where is it that I want to go? Where do I feel like I'm supposed to be? And is there a willingness within me to take a step towards that end? And that's how we measure progress. And it's just taking those little steps towards the end and doing this process of beginning again. I would say it takes a lot of this language and puts it in more psychological terms. And so for me, just again, trying to reconcile the circumstances that I'm in, but saying, all right, Lord, like, I think this is still what you want. I'm trying to accommodate. I'm trying to be patient with myself. I'm trying to understand. But I'm still willing to keep moving forward if this is what you desire for me. And if it isn't, then please, let me know. And so often I think what we find is that when we're in that battle, we're just like, it's almost like we're holding on, like we're grasping, we're just trying to, or we're clenched fists, like we're fighting. And being able to just open our hands a little bit, give space for the Lord to respond. And so I just want to share that with the listener, that wherever you find yourselves today, whatever discouragement, whatever frustration, whatever hardships that you may be going through in your life right now, find a way of being able to come to that acceptance, and being able to, as Venerable Bruno said again, accommodate yourself to the circumstances of your life, and not feel like you have to be fighting it all the time. I think that's going to be a great first step for you, for whoever's listening to this.
Mm. Well, it's very nice for me to hear that there's actually a psychological school of thought, which on the psychological level is saying what Venerable Bruno is saying on the
Mm-hmm.
level of the spiritual life, and our relationship with God and our understanding of the circumstances in which we are. I could see a wonderful working together of that psychological thinking with the spiritual message, so that both on the psychological, emotional level and the spiritual level, there's a working together, which I
Mm-hmm.
think would be very powerful. One other thought comes to me as you share that, and that is that I think it's just something I've noticed, as I've read the lives of saints and many spiritual figures over the years, and of course in my own life and many people that I've worked with, is that it does seem that very often the Lord permits a season like this in our life when things that are very important to us and that we love are taken away. And there's pain somewhere. Sometimes it's issues of health. I lost my voice for 3 years and wasn't
Mm.
able to do ministry. And I think it was something like that. You don't know what the future holds. You're cut off from what you love. You have all kinds of question marks, and there's a lot of room for discouragement and depression and what Ignatius would call spiritual desolation,
Hmm.
when we're in those times. But what I've always noticed is that when a person goes through them well, and what you're describing is precisely that effort, to see the Lord in this and to respond as well as I can, solid life of prayer, and living the family life and serving in every way that I see the Lord calling me to serve, unsure of the future, but doing my best in the present circumstances. That period of our life becomes the springboard to the richest part of our life. There's a reason why the Lord allows a Good Friday, because when we go through it well with the Lord Jesus, an Easter Sunday comes that wouldn't come otherwise. Since we're speaking about Venerable Bruno, this struck me very powerfully in writing the biography. So he is, let's see, this is 1811 when this happens. He's 52, and he supports, now servant of God's, Pius X, the Pope, whom Napoleon has imprisoned and wants cut off from the church and is browbeating to do the things that Napoleon wants him to do, and he's resisting. He won't. It's a beautiful story of courage
Mm.
in a very, very
Wow.
hard situation. But the church, people knew that he needed help, and our founder was part of clandestine support of him that was discovered by the French police, and that's how he came to be arrested and interrogated. And the French police recommended to Napoleon that his priestly faculties be stripped and that he be exiled from Turin, where he was involved in everything, anything that actually it said that anyone who went through those years and came out of them faithful to the church in Turin in that area had some relationship with Venerable Bruno.
Wow. Wow.
So the French police know this. They recommend to Napoleon that his faculties be stripped and he be exiled. Napoleon endorses the suggestion. His bishop is ordered to remove his priestly faculties. Few people dared to oppose Napoleon in those days,
Mm.
and it was done. And then he was ordered to leave the city. So he goes to this country place that he has. It's a kind of a farm in the hills outside of Turin, and in absolutely wretched health, so much so that now removed from medical care, he doesn't expect to survive this. And of course, everything that was his life just is stripped immediately from him. All of the
Mm.
involvement
Mm.
with people, the organizations that he was leading, the people who were his collaborators and friends, his ministry of confessions, everything, all of it is completely removed. And suddenly he's alone in poor physical health, bereft of everything. And what he does, and he suffered it. What he does is that he asks permission of the Holy Father in his circumstances to have the Blessed Sacrament in a chapel in this house where he's living, and the permission was given. And he spends hours and hours and hours during the day there before the Blessed Sacrament. He reads St. Bonaventure in a very special way. He gets deeply into these writings and would say that he felt that he never knew the Lord in the way he now did through these writings of Bonaventure. A priest who was a good friend of his, one of his disciples, and who visited him from time to time, just gave testimony that it was very clear that he had reached the highest levels of mystical prayer just from what he
Wow.
saw in him. Now, 3 years after this goes on, so it's 1 year, it's 2 years, it's 3 years. There's no term limit to this. Then Napoleon is defeated. He has the crushing defeat in Russia, and a year later is defeated by the Allies. And Venerable Bruno is set free to return to Turin, where everything is in shambles and in chaos after 20 years of persecution of the church, and all the seminaries closed, religious expelled, all of this. He lives 12 more years, and those 12 years were the most fruitful years of his life. Those were the years in which, for example, he founded our community. So I'm a
Wow.
fruit of those 12 years, and all of us throughout the world and the work that we're doing. He also was instrumental in starting, I'll call it in English translation, the priestly residence, the convito ecclesiastico, which is a well-known term in the Piedmont area. This was a training ground for priests after their ordination to make the transition from newly ordained to well-seasoned and well-prepared holy man of God, and ready to be a good confessor and preach and the rest. Now, we're familiar with some names there. St. Joseph Cafasso was the third rector of that. St. John Bosco was a student of that, and more blesseds and venerables than we can count. And all of this happens in those final years. So this is one of the reflections that often comes to me, that when the Lord allows these times, it's not that we've done something wrong. Like you say, I did my best to discern, and that's all God ever asked. This is a good principle for the spiritual life, that God never asks more than our best. And when we've done that, and we're doing our best to be faithful, we can be sure that we are where the Lord wants. If the Lord wants further steps, he'll clarify those as the journey goes forward. But the struggles do not mean that we need to rethink discernment that was made well earlier. It's just that the Lord continues to call us forward as we go forward. And because we've been through those painful times, we will bring to our life, our vocation, our ministry, a richness that would otherwise never have been there. So I think there's a great message of hope when you look at Venerable Bruno's life, but he's only one of many in whom you see this.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. If I could sing and hold a note, I would absolutely sing it, but I can't. So, this is a podcast, and I'm going to do the best that I can to make sure people actually continue to listen. But this classic Christmas carol is sung all over the world. But what is peace, and how can we live it? Let's be honest, this time of the year is a mix of emotions. For some, it's about drawing closer to Christ and spending time with family. But for others, it's a painful reminder of how lonely life can be. For others, it just might be the hustle and bustle of life, and we don't know how to be able to settle down. But regardless of where you find yourself this holiday season, for all of us, Advent is an invitation to reflect on what the past year has brought and prepare us for what the next year will bring. This Advent, I'm encouraging you to please set aside the Christmas shopping for just a minute and take a small step towards spiritual growth and renewal by joining me, Dr. Mari Sakasa, and my dear friend, Dr. Tom Neal, as we explore the Christian understanding of peace and practical ways that you can foster it. This 3-part Advent retreat is designed to fit around your busy holiday schedule. You will have access to the course content along with weekly live video chats with myself and the other participants. This virtual retreat, Let There Be Peace, is a new opportunity, a new way for you to be able to understand what peace means. I want you to be able to grow in understanding the 3 P's of peace. Apatheia, what does that mean? That's an old Greek term that means without passion, not apathy. I want to be able to explore practical ways for you to be able to grow in peace, and also to know about God's providence and what does surrendering to God's providence actually mean. Along the way, you're going to learn key strategies and skills to navigate challenging relationships during the holiday season. You can also learn something new about how cold showers can help you navigate anxiety. Join me and Dr. Tom Neal on this transformative Advent retreat. I promise you, you're not going to want to miss out on this one. Take the journey towards Christ this Advent. Discover the depths that God has for you, and that He alone can give you the peace that you're longing for. So click on the link in the description below and join me and my dear friend, Dr. Tom Neal, as we guide you towards peace this Advent. Yeah, okay. Podcast on hope. That's what we're speaking about. You also mentioned in the book that in addition to combating Napoleon and the political circumstances of the era, you make reference to Jansenism and its impact that it has on the church and the community in his time. Help us understand a little bit of what is that, what is Jansenism, and why was it impacting folks that he was connected with, and what was he
Or
speaking against it?
yeah, that's the name of the teaching that comes from Cornelius Jansen, a French priest in the 17th century. And it's kind of a renewed form of Pelagianism, if that
Hmm.
helps at all. But what
Hmm.
that
It
means
does.
is that, um, especially in the Jansenistic version of it, God is seen as severe, ready to pounce and condemn, um, and very, very conscious of any of our failings, let alone our sins. And you don't too easily approach this God. So, communion once a year, if that. You have records of a priest parish priest, who let 12 people receive communion at Easter. This is where the Easter duty starts to come in, at least once a year. He let 12 people out of his parish go to communion once a year and thought that that was too many. A priest
Wow.
who would not let a woman receive communion because she curled her hair, or men who had business in the city and stopped at one of the cabarets and did nothing to excess, but that fact itself would and then absolution delayed for months and months and months, the idea being that delayed absolution would help a person to take things more seriously, exactly the opposite of the way the church sees things now
Hmm.
on this. Here's one way to get an image of what Jansenism was, and this is after our founder. He dies in 1830, and think of Therese, so the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s,
Hmm.
in which she lives. And every talk that she hears, both when she goes to the Benedictine Abbey school, as a young woman, and then later in the Carmel when priests would come to give, it was all this message of the harshness of God, of the you don't know if you're saved. Maybe you're in mortal sin. And what you get out of this, and Therese knew by instinct that this wasn't right. And the marvel of
Hmm.
Therese is that surrounded by this, she knew this wasn't right. And out of this, you get her image of God, who is so loving, and never closer to us than when we bring our weakness and sinfulness and failures to him. So it's a
Hmm.
complete Copernican revolution, of this approach. But so Venerable Bruno sees this, and it's even stronger in his time, all around him. And what it does, and if you read these letters, and I highlight it in the introduction to these letters, letter to Leopoldo, for example, or to his sister Leopolda Mortigliengo, and so on, these are really good people. Let's just take Leopoldo. So he's married, father of 7 children, just a wonderful family, involved in the church. His wife is as well. 2 of his sons become priests. One of his daughters becomes a nun, and so forth. Um, Involved in anything which was part of the church's life, any need in his city of Florence where he lived. Just somebody that you'd look at and you'd say, what a wonderful, wonderful Christian, what a wonderful
Yeah.
servant of the Lord. And look at his letters. Uh, Deeply troubled, will I be saved? Have I fallen into grave sin? And so forth. And so Venerable Bruno, because this approach to God, what it does is it creates nervousness, it creates anxiety, it creates deep suffering in good people, the
Yep.
people who really
Scruples.
care about the Lord. So you have this everywhere around. And then he comes into this, and in his own way and in his own time, and he saw this through St. Alphonsus Liguori, who was really key in breaking this because he has a very different understanding of God's love and mercy. And Venerable Bruno is instrumental really in spreading this widely throughout France and Italy. And of course, in his individual practice with people, that's why people flock to him and to the oblates. When they would do these parish missions, they'd be in the confessional 16 hours a day. And that does not include the 4 hours a day when they were giving the talks. The lines would never stop because people said, "This is a God I can approach, a God who
Mm.
loves me, who understands my weakness, and who will help me grow, who isn't saying you have to be perfect before you can even think about approaching me. It's precisely in your weakness that I want to be close to you and help you grow. So that's what you get in him, a response to that Jansenistic thinking, which just opens hearts.
Yeah. So let's get another quote here. All right. This is another letter from Venerable Bruno from the book. And in his response here, I'm taking a quote, and I think this is really important to what you just said. He says, "You tell me that you are troubled by temptations. Take care, in the first place, not to consider this as something bad. Rather, be sure that we must undergo temptation. God wills us so that we might have opportunities to practice different virtues and not grow careless in the spiritual life. Scripture teaches this clearly." He then goes on to continue to make the comparison to Job and to other biblical figures, Christ himself undergoing temptations. That this notion that in the way I'm reading this is this encouragement that he's given regarding the spiritual life. Again, this sense that sometimes I feel like we have this pressure, or I guess let me rewind this. All right. Sometimes I feel like when I've read commentators on something like the three stages of the spiritual life, on Garrigou Lagrange's work, for example, that we often create in our modern Western notion these very clear distinctions of here's the purgative way, and then we move from this into the illuminative way, and then from the illuminative way into the unitive way, as if almost like there's like three channels of like water flowing in one pond, and then it goes into another, and then it's neat and clean in the other. And I don't think that's the way that he intended it. And I know that's not the way that the spiritual writers as a whole write it. But sometimes I've heard commentators speak about these three stages as like these distinct elements that are happening. And I find that a little too rigid. And so you read something like this, which is an encouragement to remind us all that we shouldn't be troubled by temptation. So often, just even the very fact that we have temptation, we beat ourselves up. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm past this. I should be past this. I've been on this journey for X number of years. Why can't I get over this? And when is grace going to come? Okay, but that beating yourself up, as we said earlier, is only going to exacerbate things. It's only making things worse. It's only pulling you away from the Lord rather than bringing you closer to him. And so, like the great mystery that's at work, why God allows certain things, again, we don't know. Even, and earlier we were talking about maybe circumstances in life, but even with things like this, where it's persistent temptations that are emerging, what I'm trying to struggle with here is, and maybe help me understand, is on one hand, I hold on to that, where it's, yes, God is allowing life to unfold a certain way. And even if he allows persistent temptations to continue on for years and years, that our faithfulness as we're trying to work through them is what he's asking us to. And it's hard to reconcile that when we do see or should see some degree of a progression that happens in the spiritual life of growth in virtue, growth in holiness. How do we reconcile both of those, where there should be some growth, or we see some growth, but then at the same time, we may find ourselves with certain sins or temptations that are present and persistent a little bit longer than what we wanted?
Sure. Well, I think it might be helpful if you continue the reading and just read through the biblical passages, because that's, and for me too, when you first read that, in the first place, don't consider this as something bad that you're dealing with temptations. Now, the rest of the letter, what are the temptations? And he'll say to her there that you'd like to be patient without ever being tempted to be impatient, and you'd like to be chaste without ever being tempted to the contrary. So I'm going to guess that it's said nicely, but probably the temptations are along these lines. And let's also keep in mind, here's a woman who has a spiritual director. She's obviously a very faithful Catholic and very sincere in trying to live it well.
Right. That's a great point.
One.
Yep.
So let's keep that in the background. But with that in the background, he says to her, don't think about these temptations as something bad. Now, would you read the biblical quotes that he gives there?
Yeah. Give me a second. I'll pull it all up.
I can get them if you don't have them right at hand.
Yeah. I have them right here. Just give me a second. I think it's right here.
Because as you go through those quotes, what you find yourself saying, yeah, he's right. I never quite thought about that.
Yep. Well, here's where the Kindle is working against me.
All right, then
So let's
I'll
see.
find it here. I have the paper
Yeah.
version.
Yep. And stuff like this we can edit out, obviously. This is the gift.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Remedy.
It's page 7 of the book.
Page 7 of the book. Yep. So I apologize. I was at a different part of the book. Mm.
So maybe read that paragraph. You tell me that you're troubled, and then
Yep.
and
You
then
tell me you're troubled by temptations. Take care in the first place. That one? You want to read that one?
I
Yep.
think probably the next paragraph too.
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, I got it here. Okay. So let's read this. All right. You tell me. I'll read the whole thing. So you tell me that you are troubled by temptations. Take care in the first place not to consider this something bad. Rather be sure that we must undergo temptations. God wills this so that we might have opportunities to practice the different virtues and not grow careless in the spiritual life. Scripture
Okay,
teaches this clearly. That's the part I
so
just read.
let's
All right.
okay. If
Yep.
you'll allow me to break in at points where I want to comment on something, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
So he goes on. He says, the life of man, Job says, is a continual battle. And Sirach says, my son, when you enter God's service, prepare your soul for temptation. It was because you were acceptable to God, St. Raphael says to Tobit, that it was necessary for you to be tried by temptation. St. Paul, after he was raised to the third heaven, had to suffer a thorn in the flesh so that his virtue might be further purified.
Yeah, so that's a point that he's making. I mean, you get that pretty impressive list of scripture, and it's
Yeah,
really
those are pretty good people there. Yeah. You got Job, you got Tobit, you got
yeah.
Sirach, you got St. Paul. Yeah. There's a pretty good list. There's good company there.
Well, it's also a very nice indication of how Venerable Bruno knows scripture so deeply, and he's a young priest at this point. You know that he can pull those passages together like that. So when you read those, you say, okay, yeah, I guess that's true. That it's necessary actually that we go through temptations because when we go through them, we grow in virtue. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
God using the enemy against himself. They keep us humble, and the very struggle to resist them causes us to get stronger spiritually. So that's the first thing that he's saying. So let's continue with what he says.
Yeah, so he continues and he says, more than all of this, the Holy One of all holy ones, Jesus Christ, also willed to undergo temptations. Thus, we should consider temptations as favors and be filled with spiritual joy according to St. James's teaching. When he says, my brothers, consider that all joy in this life consists in bearing temptations,
Okay.
knowing that in temptation we exercise patience, and with patience all virtue. I
So
just
his,
want to,
go ahead.
like, yeah, I just hear a lot of folks right now probably laughing at the notion that uh, we should consider temptations as favors and be filled with spiritual joy because we're undergoing them. Wow.
So, like when I was reading this letter and then, translating it and so forth, you get very close to a text when you do that. And
Mm-hmm.
I had the same kind of reaction. First thing, don't consider this something bad. Well, wait a second. And then you
Yeah,
go
hold
through
on.
that list of biblical figures and you say, oh, yeah, that's really there. And it's deeply there in Scripture. And then he ups the ante by saying, and above all, Jesus himself willed to be tempted. He's our model. How could we hope to be different? And then closes it there with saying that consider it joy. Joy? Well, then he quotes St. James, who says exactly that. Because of the fruits that come when we go through these well.
Mm.
Now, all of this presumes, as I said before, sincerely seeking the Lord. Proverbs
Right.
24:16, the just one falls 7 times a day. And many of the saints will say this, we're never going to be completely without venial sin in this life. But
Mm.
sincerely seeking to avoid sin um, and trying to live a good life faithful to the Lord. And again, as according to classic teaching, doing our part to avoid occasions of sin and occasions of temptation. If I watch something which isn't good for me and then have temptations as a
Mm-hmm.
result, that's a different situation. So all of this
Mm-hmm.
presumes
Mm-hmm.
that we're doing our imperfect but sincere best to live the Christian life well. And that being the case, temptations and struggles against them, as he's pointing out for her, that's going to be part of it. That's the way Jesus himself lived, and we grow when we go through them. I often think of that line of Joseph to his brothers, when he meets with them in Egypt after they've sold him into slavery. He says, "You meant it for harm, but God meant it for good." And the enemy, the evil one, means it for harm, but God permits it for good, because when we go through this, we remain humble and we grow stronger. Let's read a little bit more there.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm
if you
sorry.
want, I want to say one thing. I've started reading the sayings of the Desert Fathers, and I forget which monk it was, but the quote goes like this. Somebody asks the monk, he says, "What do you guys do in the monastery?" And he says, "We fall and we get back up. We fall and we get back up. We fall and we get back up. We fall and we get back up." That's the work of the monastic life, and I thought that was just beautiful, beautiful reminder to all of us. Um, so let's see. Okay, so in fact, it would be easy to be kind when it costs nothing, patient when our patience is never tried, and chaste when there is no struggle. Be sure then that temptations are a good that God permits, and be confident, as our faith teaches, that He will never allow you to be tempted beyond your strength.
Okay, and that's the final biblical quote there, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And that's
Yep.
beautiful, that we can face temptations knowing that the Lord will never leave us without the grace and the strength that we need to overcome them. So,
Yeah. Amen.
think about it. This woman kept that letter, and it obviously
I could
meant a
see
lot
why.
to her.
I could see why.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
my bet would be that she probably read that a good many times over the years. Just
Yeah.
that's a good insight into the understanding that underlies Venerable Bruno's spiritual guidance, the real sense of human life and the spiritual life the way it is, and always the encouragement. You can see how encouraging that is to this woman.
Yeah.
What a different message. I don't even want to say it, but you could think of a different response to that. Shame on you. How could, it's exactly the
Yeah.
contrary. And this is
Yeah.
always in Venerable
Yeah.
Bruno.
Well, later on in one of the letters, and I don't want to go to the whole quote, but he says that discouragement, um, guard against discouragement because there's no enemy more to be feared than this. Why? Like, why discouragement? Like, you think about all the temptations, okay? The list of the sins, everything that we could be tempted against. Why is discouragement the one that we should be safeguarding the most?
Because
Safeguarding
it's
against the most, yeah.
because it's the only thing that can keep us from rising up again, beginning again, and continuing on the journey. uh, Discouragement. So I failed. I keep failing with this. What's the point? I'm never going to change. Now, if we know Ignatius of Loyola's teaching on discernment, you hear the voice of the one he calls the enemy there, claiming power over the future and always in a dark key. It's just classic action of the enemy in a person. But if we believe that, um, this kind of voice, you're mediocre, it's all you're ever going to be.
Hmm.
You want to be a man or a woman of prayer, you never will be. Your prayer is always going to be as, low quality as it is right now. You miss opportunities, and others can be holy men and women, wives, husbands, workers in the world, children, but not you. All right, as soon as we start to believe that kind of discouragement, then we will stand still and we may even regress.
Hmm.
So this is what Venerable Bruno is saying is, it doesn't matter what you've done or what you're afraid you've done. There's never anything that can stop you, even right now. You don't have to wait till tomorrow morning. Right now,
Hmm.
from turning to God and asking for forgiveness if you need it, that He is honored to give, that He delights to give, and then beginning again. All right, you say, well, I did that, but I fell again. Begin again. Well, I did that, but I
Hmm.
fell again. Begin again. And that's exactly the contrary of that discouragement, which says, I fell again, I fell again. I guess it's never going to change. So
Hmm.
that discouragement is the real enemy in the spiritual life. All the more in the circumstances in which he lived. But as I was saying earlier, this is so widespread today.
Yeah.
That's why his message becomes, I would say, even urgent today,
Hmm.
because he can speak to that. I just always remember a few years ago I did another book on Venerable Bruno, It's 114 quotations from his writings with some commentary on them, but a lot of overlap in the message.
Hmm.
And maybe the most beautiful thing I heard was a woman told me, she said, I was up at 4 a.m. reading that book and my tears were falling. I just couldn't believe it. This is really the way God is. And these would be people, as I say, we all have that place that's afraid in us. Okay, never give in to that discouragement because that's the only thing that can stop you from growing. And it
Yeah.
need never do that.
I'm thinking of some quotes from Father Walter Chiswick, another hero of mine in the spiritual life, and he would encourage his directees. There's one letter that he wrote, and he says, "Try your best, and if your best isn't enough, try your lousy best, and if your lousy best isn't enough, try your lousy best." Just like just keep trying, keep trying, keep trying.
Yep.
And again, where this pairs nicely with the psychological concepts here is that the narrative that we live by, we're going to find a confirmation to it. We're going to have a confirmation bias towards that narrative, towards that story that we tell ourselves. And so, for example, like when folks come to me for counseling and I start asking them like what's going on, they'll share with me their stories, share with me what they're going through. And then I ask them maybe early on, like, give me some childhood experiences, some memories, some stories here of your life that where this story started to take root. And so they'll share experiences like that. Well, over the course of therapy, as we try to navigate that voice, try to navigate that narrative, and try to give space for just the possibility that there could be an alternative narrative. Maybe there's another voice at work here, another narrative, another story that we can live by that isn't so discouraging. What ends up happening is when we just open up that and you start seeing just even the possibility of that, all of a sudden their memories start to change. And now they can actually start talking about positive experiences that have happened in their life, stories that then confirm that new narrative, things that they hadn't remembered before. And it's always so fascinating to me because memory is so contingent on our subjective experience, how we feel right now. The state of our lives often contributes to the story that we tell ourselves. And so if we're stuck in a rut, um, just giving space, giving a little bit of openness to believe a different story, to just have a possibility, just even the possibility of that being true, you're going to see that's going to open up some new worlds for you. And that I've seen time and time again in my own life. And I've seen it, of course, in the lives of my clients and the people that I've worked with. And it's really, really important. And so I wholeheartedly agree and want to just affirm people to fight through whatever discouragement that you're experiencing in life. And I love how you said so beautifully that it's the worst because it's the one that prevents us from keeping going on. It's the one that attacks hope. It's the one that prevents us from believing that something good can happen.
Mhm.
So thank you. Mercy. Well, Father Gallagher, if I would love to hear any other thoughts you have here as we're starting to wrap up this conversation. I could talk to you for another hour and a half easy. I know it's always such a gift having you on the podcast. But any final thoughts here for people? Well, I guess really it's this. Let me ask you this question. The final letter that you have is not by Venerable Bruno, but it's by a gentleman who's on a retreat who's interacting with him on this 8-day retreat that he has. And he refers to Venerable Bruno as being full of peace. So maybe this can be the final kind of wrap up to our conversation. Despite everything that you shared about his life, of having persistent health challenges, of having political exile, of having his faculties stripped, of the hardships just of life at that time, of combating Jansenism and that strictness and that rigidity that was present within many within the church, and him just working against all of that. How is it that with all of those hardships that he experienced, that at the end of his life, we can look at him and a gentleman can look at him and say that he is full of peace?
So what he's describing there is Venerable Bruno. It's the last year of his life. He's 70 at this point. He would die at 71. And this gentleman, Michele, in the retreat, comes frequently to speak to Venerable Bruno. There are talks that they're going to but they also have access to the priests to speak with them one-on-one. And he knows Venerable Bruno well because Venerable Bruno assisted his grandmother in her last days. So there's a link there with the family. And on this particular day, he's writing to his wife Adele, and he's telling her, "I was deeply moved this morning." He had gone to see Venerable Bruno, and Venerable Bruno is probably lying down at this point just because of physical weakness when he comes to see him. And one of his physical ills was, call it an asthma. I wouldn't know what the formal medical term is, but he could get what he would describe it as an oppression of the chest that made it very hard for him to breathe. And when Michele is there to visit with him, he has one of these attacks, and he's struggling even to breathe. And what Michele says is that when he has these attacks, what he does is he pronounces the word paradise, paradiso. He pronounces it, just says it, several times. But he says with such a deep faith that it just moves everything within me. And he says, but there is peace in his look. There's peace in his face. So where does that peace come from? I think it comes from, at that particular point that Michele is speaking about here, it's his longing for eternal life. He loved a saying that his mentor, and Father Diesbach, who was a really saintly priest, used to always say, and paradise pays for everything. Paradiso paga per tutto. Paradise pays for everything. And in one of the letters, he speaks about his longing to go and be with his beloved Jesus. And he knows at this point that he doesn't have much longer to live. And he's doing the best he can to use the remaining health that he has. Look at him. He's meeting this man in these conditions, to assist him. So I think that's where you get the deep peace at this point. A life well lived. He knows that not too much time lies before him. And the deep, deep longing, because the heart of his life is his love for Jesus. That's the heart of it. And his longing to be with him.
Say that again. Paradise pays for everything. What was the saying?
Paradise pays for everything. Yeah. Paradiso paga per tutto. So the priest who said that had many physical problems himself and underwent the persecutions in those years, but was just... we could go on. I could go on endlessly about him. If anybody wants to know more about him, I've described him in the biography of Venerable Bruno that I wrote. And so that was when he was suffering in these ways. That was his saying. Paradise will pay for all of this. It's all worth it because of the reward in paradise.
Well, let us maintain that eschatological hope, that vision, that sight on the Lord and His goodness, and so. If folks have been listening to this and they are interested in some other resources related to Venerable Bruno, what would you recommend?
Well, at this point, this is the fourth book that I've done on Venerable Bruno. So people can go on my website, which is discernment.institute, and you'll find them, or go on Amazon. They're available everywhere. So if you want a full-length biography, that book is called, and it won't be surprising, Begin Again, The Life and Spiritual Legacy of Bruno Lantieri. And then there is this book about which we've been speaking, if you want peace in this life, another called Overcoming Spiritual Discouragement, to which I referred the various quotations, and then a third about a lovely way of praying with the Mass, a biblical way of praying the Mass, in which he has different biblical figures whose hearts show us the affections of the heart with which to live the various parts of the Mass. Go to church the way Simeon went to the temple, and so forth. So those are available. And if you go on the website for my community, which is omvusa.org, omvusa.org, and click on the opening menu, click on Founder, and then just follow some prompts there. Actually, I have a series of 10 half-hour video recorded talks that'll take you through his teaching there. And then if you go on the Discerning Hearts app, I have, I don't remember, 2 or 3 series on him there as well.
Well, we will have links to all of that in the show notes for sure, so that people can continue to avail themselves to your work and particularly the work that you have pointing to people to Venerable Bruno. You briefly mentioned this new institute that you have. So if you don't mind just sharing a little bit about what this Discernment Institute is
Oh,
and what's happening. You got some new things happening on your side here, Father Gallagher.
we do. Yeah. Thank you. What happened is a couple of years ago, the work I've been doing with discernment for about 40 years now just got bigger than one person. I was just getting overwhelmed. I couldn't keep up with all the requests and the interest and so forth. And so I was asked by my superior to form a board and study what the best solution to this would be. And the proposal was about a year ago to form the Ignatian Discernment Institute with more priests involved and a formal structure so that we can get this out to more people and it can continue when I'm no longer able to do it. Basically, this teaching of St. Ignatius of Loyola on discernment is the most powerful tool in the Catholic spiritual tradition for overcoming discouragement. And that's why people just can't get enough of it when you present it in the way that I hope by God's grace I've been able to develop and you see in all the books and so forth. So now I do have a second one of our priests who is very competent full-time with me in this. The legal structure of the Institute is set up. We're just getting into social media. That'll be up very soon. There's a website, discernment.institute, where people can find all this. And we will be shortly developing a curriculum, probably a 2-year program for people who want to learn this deeply and then want to be able to teach it to others. So all of that's unfolding now.
That sounds great. Well, we will certainly keep that in our prayers and just continued support for you and the great work that you do. As always, it's a delight having you on the podcast. And so thank you so much for taking time from your schedule, from your writing schedule, your speaking schedule, and being able to join me and my listeners in today's podcast. So many blessings to you, Father Gallagher. God bless you, and just keep up all the great work that you're doing.
Thank you. Always great to be with you.